Begin. Thank you. Welcome. My name is Lisa Blythe. I'm with the New Jersey Commission. Welcome to this AmeriCorps General Technical Assistance for the FY24-25 competitive notice of funding opportunity. I am delighted to welcome our presenters today's training. We have with us from Montclair University Center for Research Evaluation, Crees.
And Education and Human Services. So
Thank you.
close.
So close. It is early. We have with us Aaron Johnson and Millie Benitez. And so without further ado, thank you, ladies.
Okay, thank you. Good
Thank
morning,
you.
everybody. We're so excited to see you all this morning. I see some familiar faces. I see some new faces. So it's so nice to see you all. Before we get started, what I wondered if we could do is so that we can get to know you a little better and you get to know us a little better. You know this is coming, right? What I wonder if maybe we can come off mute if you want. I don't know where you all are, but if you could at least come off mute one at a time, introduce yourself, your organization, and maybe a key thing that you're hoping to take away from today or a key question that you might have that you're hoping to get answered. And so Dawn's ready to go. Go for it, Dawn. Sorry, I
I
saw you
am.
come off mute, whether you wanted to or not. There you
Yes,
go.
no, I'm ready. Hi, I'm Dawn Tyler, representing New Hope ETC, and really interested in we've applied a couple of times, haven't been successful, and really trying to be on the training to see maybe where we've been falling short. I know that the program is really this opportunity is great to help us help students in Jersey City, which is our focus. So I'm just really anxious to kind of learn on today.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Dawn. And I remember seeing New Hope ETC before, so
Yes.
welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay, Del Charisse, if I said that right, I see you came off mute.
Yes, I'm Del Dinsley from Center for Family Services, representing the Power Core and Recovery Core programs. My main goal from this session is just to learn more about the back-end grant aspects of the program. I typically focus on the other side, more compliance things, but this is a new venture for me.
Oh, welcome to coming to see, sorry for this analogy, how the sausage is made. Um, but it's delicious. Thank you. Nice to see you, Del. And I saw you last week. You get us twice in 2 weeks. Sorry, not sorry. All right, who's next?
I'll go next. I'm so sorry. I'm
Oh.
feeling under the weather, so that is why my video is off. But my name is Helene Zincraft. I am a grant writer for Court-Appointed Special Advocates of New Jersey. And my goal for this session is just to gain more information, hear more about the process, and really anything that you have to say. I'm going to be listening and thinking about it.
Great, thank you. And thanks for joining us, especially when you're not feeling so great. I know that's no fun.
Yes, thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Okay, who's next?
I'll go. I'm Rakisha Goldberg. I'm from Relay Graduate School of Education, which we just say Relay to call ourselves real quick. And we have a professional core program, which is serving K-12 students in classrooms in schools with teacher shortages and high teacher turnover as the root cause, but also kind of ongoing communities where just underserved communities where education in general has had like a chronic problem with both staffing as well as just closing that opportunity gap for folks to succeed over the long term, right? So our professional core places teachers in classrooms, and they have a mentored supported pathway as they gain their professional credentials of certification and master's degrees and do a national service program, which we find really gives our members a lot of just meaning to what they do. So it's kind of for us to an important reciprocal aspect of like a synergistic aspect of building retention through service and service building retention, right?
Excellent. Thank you. It's nice to see you again. It's been a bit, so always good to hear from you.
Oh, thank you. Yep, it's 7 a.m. here in California, or 7:15. So I have the morning light.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. It's kind of like my New Jersey ritual. I like it.
Well, I hope you've got coffee or tea, whatever.
I did.
Excellent. All right. Last but not least, Christina, I see you're here.
Yes. Hi, good morning. So my name is Christina. I'm the AmeriCorps Program Director at St. Paul's Community Development Corporation in Paterson. We serve the city of Paterson in a lot of different ways, but our primary focuses are education, providing support in 2 full-service community schools, as well as the full-service community school center that serves the entire district of Paterson, as well as addressing food insecurity at our food pantry, as well as supplemental food pantries that are in the public schools as well. So we're typically a formula funded program. So I guess as far as this morning, I'm just looking at getting some information around a logic model and theory of change that would help us, prepare for this competitive application. So thank you.
Excellent. And always good to hear from you too. Another person that has been stuck with us 2 times in 2 weeks. All right.
I apologize. I didn't say, I'm so out of it still, drinking my coffee still. What I wanted to get out of this session, with the overall, the many changes to the NOFO, for me today is really just to get a handle on what is appropriate for this extended opportunity in the logic model versus what I'm used to doing, where it's falling into the narrative, and just really making sure that I'm like tightening between the two really well. So that's my goal.
And that is a perfect segue to get us going. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We have a slide deck. This will be shared with you, so just know that that's going to happen. And we're going to go through this, and here we go. So actually, before I keep going, Millie, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself before I really take off and start running?
Oh, okay. Yeah, we forgot about doing that. Hi, my name is Millie Benitez, and an evaluation associate at CRIS. I've been working, I think, the AmeriCorps project for the last 2 years or so, 2 or 3 years. I'm pretty new to this, to the AmeriCorps grant, but I'm not new to program evaluation. I've been doing this for a long time, and I had the pleasure of working with Erin in this project and other projects too. So welcome, everyone. I hope you find our presentation very useful.
Oh, thank
Yep.
you so much. Before, I'd like my colleagues to introduce
Yep.
themselves. I apologize, I didn't do that. If you guys would. Lori or Carissa, thanks.
Hi, I'm Lori Barrows. I am with the New Jersey State Commission, and I'm a program officer there. So I help to support the programs to be successful.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry that I'm off camera. I'm multitasking this fine morning. I'm Carissa. I'm also a program officer with the State Commission, but I also help with the fiscal side of managing your programs. So if you've submitted a budget or some type of fiscal report, you're probably communicating with me. So
Nice to see you this morning, Carissa and Lori and Lisa, of course. Okay, so who's the talking head, right? So I'm Erin. I'm the Associate Director of CREES. I'm super excited to chat with you. And to get going, here's how today's going to roll. We're going to give you, because like Carissa, we all have multiple hats that we wear, and those hats do not come off, even though we're sitting in a 2-hour training. So we understand that folks are going to sort of fade in, fade out. You're listening to what in particular you're interested in today. We like that and we appreciate that. So here's how we're going to roll. We're going to do a quick overview of what's new and different, because as you heard from Ricky, there are some substantial changes in this NOFO. We're going to talk about those that are relevant to what we're going to talk about. That was circular, there you go. But we're going to talk about those that are relevant to sort of the program design of the application. Then we're going to break those components down for you. We're going to walk through a logic model. We're going to walk through performance measures. And then because you will likely need a break because your mind might just empty out of your ears, which I understand, or you might need to go look at your email or walk around for a second. We'll give you about a 5-minute break or so. Then we're going to come back and we're going to dig into evidence. And then we're going to give you some resources and tools that can help and a wrap up. Now, for those of you that have been on this session before, you'll see some things that are familiar. You're going to see some new things. So just know some of this, you're going to be like, I think I've seen this before, and you're right, right? The pieces of this NOFO that are the same, we've kept fairly consistent, but those pieces that are different, we've changed up a little bit, okay? All right, so now for the key part, because, and I say this all the time when I present, but I think it holds true, which is our attention spans only last so long. And so typically when you start off the morning, those are the things that you retain and those are the things you hold on to. So if you do fade off, these are the things we really want you to know and what we want you to take away from today. First, what's new or different? First of all, in the program design section of the application, there are changes. One of them is what used to be called the community problem is now just retitled community, more assets-based clearly. And that section is going to include some of the traditional information that we've seen it ask for. It also includes a new prompt to ensure that you're describing and addressing the role that inequities may play in contributing to the problem. So that may be current or historical inequities. The other thing that's new or different is the theory of change section is gone. Let me say that again. The theory of change section is gone, which makes this a little bit of a tricky application to write. Now, the thing to know is that while that section is excluded and you're not sitting there describing your particular program and what you're going to do in your particular program in terms of the intervention, you still need to have a really solid understanding of what your program is going to do and how it's going to work to make this application successful. Okay, so I'm going to say that one more time. You don't have to write in the application all the nuts and bolts of your program design in the narrative, but you still need to have it really clearly outlined in your head because otherwise the rest of this application is not going to work. My opinion, but I feel like that actually is probably true. Next, because of that theory of change coming out of the narrative, the logic model now takes center stage. I think Millie called it right when she said it takes center stage here. The logic model is the main way you are going to communicate what your intervention, what your program is going to look like. And so because there is more emphasis on the logic model and because more information is being asked of to be included in your logic model, and basically the logic model's got to do a really big job. They've expanded the page limits from 3 to 8. Okay, so if you're thinking about where to put your efforts on describing your program, you're going to put it in the logic model section. Last but not least, and we're not going to talk about this, but we did want to mention it in the beginning because it's the first time we've seen it. Typically, we've never seen any particular points attributed in the budget section to anything related to data collection. That's new this year, and we were happy to see this because we're evaluators, right? But what we notice is that data collection is a scored component where you describe funds that are set aside for data collection efforts, whether it be data systems or perhaps staffing of anybody that you might need to support your data collection. And this is a scored section of your cost effectiveness and budget adequacy section. So when we talk about performance measures and we talk about your outcomes, this now is looking for, well, are you putting resources into measuring that? So something to note there that we picked up. Okay. The scoring is the same as it has been last year, but this is why we're talking about program design, because we're going to talk through community and logic model, and we're going to talk about evidence tier and evidence quality. That makes up 44 points of your potential 100 points. So this is a big section, and everything else sort of leads into this. The other thing I wanted to highlight for you is some of the specific headlines that you might be including in your application, and some of the other specific categories that they're looking at this year have been renamed. in particular, check out commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. That sort of title, that header is new this year. It's been integrated into all of the others, but those have been the same. Yes, thank you, Ricky. The 24, 12, and 8 was the same as in prior years. So the point allocation has not changed. The point of that circle is just to note that what we're talking about today represents 44 points of your total, of the total amount of points that could be awarded. Yep. All right. So with that preview, Millie's going to dive into the first piece of this, but hopefully now you know what's coming for you. Go ahead, Millie.
Okay. Oh, I thought this was your part, but that's okay. I'll be happy to do it. So, talking about the community problem, as Erin just explained to you, this is basically when you will be determining, you know, you probably had already thought about this, and so you will provide the details about what the AmeriCorps program would be addressing, would be mitigating in your community. It describes the role of current or historical inequities. As Erin mentioned earlier, this piece is very important this year. So that's something that you have to pay attention to. It's something that you need to document. And describe the community problem would be describing the community need and the severity of the problem in that particular community in relation to the CDC Social Vulnerability Index. And that's something that you probably are familiar with by now. If not, we're going to show you in a little bit. Next. The logic model, of course, you know, that is something that you're going to get very familiar with today. I'm sure that some of you already understand logic models. You had seen them. But the way we are going to talk about the logic model today will be just to break it down, unpack it for you. And the idea is that you will use the logic model to present your evidence-based intervention and all the things that make up the program and what the results of that program will be. So basically the logic model will be the story of your program. It would be like this is the way my program will work. It will tell about the beneficiaries, the intervention activities, and exactly what will happen or what do you expect to happen as a result of those interventions. Next. And then we're going to be talking about evidence too. That's something that is a very important piece of this because you have to justify, you know, what the members will be doing. So if you're proposing a program, the idea is that you will say, well, I know we can do this because this had worked, either because we had implemented this program before and we have some evidence that it works, or similar programs have been implemented and you will be able to provide the evidence in, you know, citing resources or sources that will explain that, yes, this program in a similar setting had worked. So we're going to explain this in more detail. Erin will be doing that later. That will be the last piece of the presentation. And next. And performance measures, I know you're very familiar. Who is not familiar with performance measures by now? But we're going to hammer on this again. This is something that will be pretty easy for most of you, especially if you're already doing any AmeriCorps program and you have an output and outcome pairing. The idea is, and what we're going to be talking about in more detail, is that this has to really be linked to your program. So it has to make sense. Next. So what we are going to try to convey today is this message that all application sections relate, and you will describe a problem and you will have the answer to the problem by way of your program design. If you do all of that, you know, you will be able to produce certain benefits. And performance measures and evidence are very important to support your application in this way. Next. Okay, and again, we're going to rehash on community a little bit longer because you need to be very explicit about what the community problem is. And what is happening in the community at the time. So next, we're going to talk a little bit more about community. And again, community issue or concern that you need the American members to help address. Next. Okay, this is your opportunity when you are writing this section that will explain in greater detail what specifically the problem is, how pervasive it is the problem, for whom or where is the worst. And one thing that is very important that you try to address is how do current or historical inequities contribute to the problem, and that's something, again, that it will speak of the seriousness of the problem, how does it relate to the CDC's Social Vulnerability Index, and why does this matter? So if you're already thinking about, the problem that you'll be addressing, just think a little further about these key points that you will have to address in describing the community problem. Next.
One quick note, just to respond to the question that was in the chat, is that to clarify, this part is still going to be in your narrative. So of that 10 pages that you have to write in the narrative of your application, these things that Millie just walked through and highlighted for you, this is the description that you have room in your narrative to write about. So this is, you're going to write like you would a regular grant application where you're putting in the rationale for what you're doing. Again, this still remains in your narrative. It's going to come back 3 other times, but know that you are going to write it in your narrative. Okay.
So in essence, it's basically with the community probably addressing the scope, the significance, and the causes. Make sure that all those things are addressed in the description. And when we talk about social vulnerability, probably some of you are familiar with this map. I cannot go in. Let me see. Can you open the map, Erin, at your end? I just wanted to show them New Jersey, and if we can show them how to look for their county specifically. There we have the map of New Jersey. What you see there in terms of colors, the lighter color, those are areas that the vulnerability index is very low. And the opposite of that is that the darker shades of blue, that is a higher index. So for instance, if you're working in the Patterson area, you want to know what Passaic County is, you can just click there on the county and you get your vulnerability index.
It does take a minute to load,
It's
so just know
slow.
this. There's a lot of data behind here, and you can see that once you go into statewide and you pick the state, you can switch from counties to census tracts, so you can get more neighborhood level data.
Okay,
when you click on it, when you click on it, it'll show you the score. 1 is highest, 0 is lowest. So wherever I just clicked in census tract ending in 64200 is a particularly vulnerable community based on this index, and you can click view in table and it'll show you much more data than you wanted, but it still gives you lots of opportunities to unpack this.
Exactly. Yeah. We just wanted to show you that so you know where to go to get more information to describe your program, your community problem, I'm sorry. Okay, so thank you, Erin.
Did it go back?
Okay, when it's so important to know here is that in terms of the social vulnerability index, what it means is the degree to which a community exhibits certain social conditions that hopefully you will be addressing with your program. It could be high poverty, low percentage of people with transportation issues, crowded household, and anything that will affect people or how you say, people's progress in life. And next. So we're going to go now to the fun part. And as we mentioned earlier, but some of you probably are familiar with logic models. And I hope that when we unpack this now, it will sort of make you feel that, hey, I can do this. And that's the idea. The idea. And I heard from someone, I was doing a TA session the other day, and the person told me, oh, no. I want to hear about this again, because the more I hear about it, I feel more comfortable, So, and that happens to all of us. So I hope that even if you are experienced, with logic models, that you find something here that will make you think, I say, oh, I know my next logic model can be better, So, and as we know now, it's taking center stage. It's going to be hugely important. And it's going to go from being continue to be the visual representation of your program, but it's going to offer more details now. In terms of how the program actually works. So all the relationships that go from the resources that you put in, the activities that you implement, what comes out of the activities, all of that should be easily expressed or easily understood by the reader by viewing your logic model. So we know it's a requirement attachment, and that is required information from AC that you must include. Next. Okay, so here is this beautiful logic model that Erin put together. I love the color scheme. And basically to show you, this is really a roadmap, yeah? It's just saying that if you do this, if you have all these resources or ingredients, you will be able to deliver the activities that make up your program. So that will be your strategies, your methods, specifically saying what your program will do. And if you do those two things first, you are going to be able to measure what resulted of those activities in terms of counts, So if you said you're going to deliver a program somewhere with X number of people, the output should be the number of people that you hope to benefit from your intervention. And then based on the outputs, you expect some outcomes. So in order to realize the outcomes, you have to have all these other things running in place. So you can then measure your outcomes, either midterm or long-term outcomes. So, and we're going to talk in more details about each of these pieces. Next. Well, I wanted to show you a logic model representing a program that AC members would be doing, yeah? So here you go. And I think for me, I'm a very visual person, and I know that when I see something, I know if I'm looking at a logic model and I already have a program in mind and I know what I'm supposed to be doing, that I can use this as a guide, So we are breaking out each of these components, but looking at the logic model, it sort of helps you put in perspective, your own situation, your own program. So here, this is what I was trying to do, what I'm trying to do in showing you this, just to get you to think about your own program. And when we cover each of these components, so you know more about what we're talking about, what we mean. And I'm going to explain in more detail each of these sections. But this is just kind of, in this particular case, this is about a program that has to do with educating people about nutrition, and it will be directly with the students. It will be also through community events, and it expects to serve, a number of people, in this case, at least 500 in 1 hour, events. So they have, in this case, there is a way to measure, through pre and post tests to measure the short-term outcomes. So, and more to come on this. So next. Okay, we cannot talk enough about the problem. So here we go again, talking about the problem. Yes, all this information is required. to describe the community problems. So this is very important because that's one of the first things that they're going to see in your application when we're talking about program design is whether the problem is serious enough, and if your program design actually will be able to tackle the problem and make the situation better. Next. So anybody reading about your problem should be able to see what you're trying to address. You have to make sure that you summarize the key points, make sure this matches the community section of the narrative, and make sure this matches the performance measure module. Now, remember, this time, the problem, although you might have something in your narrative about the problem, you have to include the key points of the problem in the logic model. So there should be a space for that. And that should be part. So in one shot, you will have everything, problems, inputs, activities, all of that would be in your logic model. And we already mentioned inputs, and this is the way to count, an account actually for what you did, what the activities were. So the resources, I'm sorry, I was thinking outputs. Inputs, getting all confused here. So the inputs are the resources necessary to deliver the intervention, and this can be anything from your partner sites, these agreements that you have where you will be doing your program. It might be funding, it can be curriculum. It can be the context, the setting where the activities will occur. And of course, it can be also about the number and type of members that you will be needing for your program. And also the beneficiaries, who will be the people that will benefit from the program, because you will have access to the population. Okay, next. Make sure that you include all the required information, specifically, make sure you mention the characteristic of or qualifications of the American members that you expect to have. So it might be that you want bilingual AC members because you will be serving a population, whatever the population is. Let's say you are serving the Haitian population in a community. Let's say you're serving a Latino population. You might need to find people that speak the language. And it might be that you want people with educational background or with health, background, or even some medical background. So whatever it is, just make sure that you include that information. And of course, again, we mentioned the beneficiaries. Make sure that you state who would be benefiting from your programs. So basically, again, we talk about ingredients. Inputs are all about the resources that you have or need to be able to deliver the program, to deliver those activities that comprise your program. And that might include training for the AC members. And a lot of times, programs offer a particular training because they know that in order for the AC member to deliver a program, they will need to be well-versed in something specifically. So Erin has a note here. If you are not 100% centered about the number of sites, provide some sense of how. I'm sorry, I didn't see the rest, Erin. Okay.
There's a question in the chat just about not being always certain at the application stage about how many sites. And this is very common. We see this often. And I think our recommendation is it's best to give some sense of a range, right? So even if you don't know exactly what it is, and Yvette's nodding, so that makes me feel good. Hi, Yvette. But I think making sure that you give them some sense of how many, even if you're not 100% sure, is important. And here's the why. If you're like me, it's like, okay, but why? Right? The point is, you are then going to tell them that these are the targets of my performance measure, and these are the number of MSYs that I need, and this is how much money I need, right? But all of those really come together and say, well, if you're going to work at one site and you think you're going to reach 1,000 people in your performance measure, and of that 800 are going to have outcomes, and you need 20 members, that site better be really pretty big, right? So it sort of helps provide some context about the scope of your program, and it gives additional context to the degree that your performance measure targets for both your outputs and outcomes are realistic and attainable.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the why.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that, because it is important that also, as you said, that if you say I need X number of AC members, that, you know, the reader will say, oh, you know, yeah, it makes sense because of the number of locations, the extent of your program, the number of people that you are proposing to serve, all of those things. So thank you, Erin. And thank you for the question, whoever asked the question. That was great. Next. And then here we go. We come to the activities that comprise your program. So here, it would be about describing the core activities that define intervention or program that members will implement or deliver. This will include, of course, the program duration, very important. You have to establish this program would be 26 weeks. Let's say if it's in a school program, let's say you are going to run it for 26 weeks or months or whatever, you will establish, you know, that timeline, that time frame, and total number of weeks or months, whatever, sessions. The dosage, for how long, you know, would the program activity take place? And also the target population for the particular intervention. So it might be that you might have 2 or 3 different things going on. So you might have an intervention for children, you know. So you will have to say, well, X number of children, you know, or third graders, you know. And it might be that you have also an intervention for their parents, you know. So the parents will benefit too. So you have to make sure you include that there, that there will be a program for the parents, you know, the 10 session, weekly session for parents about health education or whatever. So you will be able to mention that there and be specific about it. So people understand all the layers of the program. Next. So make sure you include the specific strategies, because when people look at your activities, at a glance, they should be able to say, oh, okay, this makes sense according to the problem that they describe. And make sure that the actions, the strategies and methods, you know, are clearly stated. Again, target population should align with the population you identify as having the problem in your community. So that's key. That's very important. And we already mentioned that because we don't want to miss that. So next.
I just want to sort of put an exclamation point
Yes,
on this
please.
section, which is previously, for those of you who've ever submitted an AmeriCorps application, at least within the last 5 years, or have looked at past applications, right? This section is really critical. You had narrative space in past years to really expand and explain what you anticipate your members to do, right? You had room in the narrative to say, my members are going to do X, Y, and Z, and you had sort of elbow room, right? You could really narrate that out. That's different this year. The logic model activities column is where it's at. And so this is tricky, at least in my opinion, because you have this very sort of narrative thing that we're used to describing about our program, and you're now limited to these bullets, basically. And you have to hit the requirements that Millie outlined in terms of the dosage and the duration and the frequency. And it also has to be really clear. And I think for programs, Christina, I'm thinking about yours too, about where you have multiple kinds of interventions that your members are delivering, being able to really clearly map that out and very specifically, yet briefly map that out is going to be tricky. And I just want to sort of put an exclamation point on this because I think my recommendation as you're designing this is to maybe write it out first, what you're like basically what you would have the program do, and then from there go in and try and bullet it out and see if you can go from something bigger to something smaller, because I think that will make sure that you hit all of the details that you need. I think if you go in and just try and populate the logic model, I'm afraid that you might miss some of the key pieces. So I think my recommendation as you're sort of starting to populate this is either write out what your program is, draw it out, get out of the logic model framework first. And then once you have it clear and concrete about what your program really will do in terms of the member activities to the beneficiaries, then take what you have and move it into the activities column and refine it that way. I think that will help make sure that you get this to a very specific level. You might benefit from multiple phases of sort of data reduction or sort of information processing, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. Yeah, and I forgot to mention, I had it on my notes and then I was flying through that. Definitely under the activities, let's say you had one of your input resources, you said that you are going to be training your AC members on a specific, area, you will have to include that in the activity column. And say, 20 members or 20 AC members will be trained in health education or whatever, or nutrition education or something like that. Okay, great. Next. Okay, so we mentioned outputs earlier, and as we know, we think of the outputs as the direct product of your program activities. So whatever activities you do, you will be able to account for them. And so in the output section, you will say, oh, so if you were going to train AC members, one of the outputs would be that 20 AC members, are trained. So it's the representation. The output is basically the representation of all the activities, the count, what was done, what was produced. So include the number of beneficiaries served, types and number of activities conducted, all of that. So let's say you did, so you have proposed to do events, 1 hour events, community events to educate the public about health. You will say, how many events, how many people served, all those things will be included in the outputs. So one important piece is this equity gaps clause that we saw in the application. They included that this year. And Erin and I were like, I wonder what this means. So I've been thinking and thinking and thinking. We were going to call Yvette and ask Yvette, but I think I have a response to that. Let's say.
Sorry,
so basically, so basically, the way I sort of understand this is that, let's say, if you are in your problem, when you describe the community problem, when you talk about that, and you say that, yes, there have been this, because we're asking you to consider in your community problem, any inequities that you think you will be addressing with your program. Yeah, any inequities that exist. And so here the output is, if you said, yes, there are these inequities and our program will take care of this, or we alleviate, the situation for these people, whatever, or in the community, that in the output section, you make sure you account for those. So let's say, so you expect that this equity gap will be closed, whatever it is. So you have to make the connection from the original statements in the problem. Is that the case, Iber Ramos?
What was the question originally?
No, the question is like
About the equity gap, to define the equity gaps. Yeah, yeah.
So it should be defined. This in the output section, the way I think about this, that people will be reporting based on the inequities that they identify in the community problem, and they have to make sure they address it here in the output section, because ideally they would be tackling the issue and closing the gap. Yeah. So
yes, perfectly stated. Yes, it's an output. I'm not sure if it should be an output, but that's where they have it. And that's fine. That's you know, it is, as you said, if there's inequities in the particular community, if you can summarize or numerically state, because outputs again are your units of service. So if you could identify what equity gaps you believe, you know, your program was able to close as a result of those interventions, and how you would measure that, I'm sure you'll get into that at some point in terms of how you're going to measure that, but it could be through surveys, it could be self-identification, whatever that would be. But yes, I think that's...
You know what? It's interesting that you said measure. How do we measure that? Because, you know, I'm thinking that probably the way to measure it is that if you said you were going to do something, let's say the students, you know, there is the school systems, you know, the students are doing very poorly and they don't have enough resources. So you are going to bring those resources to the students that need it the most. You know? Mm-hmm. So there you will be closing the gap, yeah? So yeah. I think that by virtue or by the fact that you are doing it, you are at least attempting to close the gap. We'll know if the gap was closed when the outcomes are reported. Yeah? Isn't that so in my head, that's the way I'm spinning this. I don't know.
Yes.
Looks
that
like
sounds, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it looks like we have a question.
We have a hand raised.
Go ahead, Ricky.
Yeah, so it's on this aspect of quantifying for the output section. For our program, again, we're placing teachers as a professional core in schools with inadequate numbers of teachers. So they're working with the kids on a daily basis. So I understand in how that plays out in the columns before outputs. But here at the pivot point between outputs and outcomes, is it kind of like, as far as quantifying the equity gaps closed here, maybe I'm not quantifying it till the outcomes. I want to be sure I'm like thinking of it correctly in light of the comments all of you provided just now. I can quantify the equity gaps aspect in my outcomes, whether they're short or mid or long. But here, maybe it's more of stating how those activities are doing X and Y in order to address the equity gap, as opposed to somehow showing the tightening in a quantifiable way here of that equity gap. Does my question make sense? Like, oh, we're placing X number of members in order to serve students where there's an inadequate number of teachers versus students in the classroom.
I think I get where you're going, and I think it's a matter of how it's described in that column, right? Because I think in using the language, we did this in order to do that, I'm going to say that sounds like an activity, and then the in order to gets you to an outcome, right? If I'm the reviewer looking at this, which I'm not, right? Well, I'm not the reviewer. But that said, it's almost as though you're going to have we placed X number of teachers in Y location, and
Correct.
The outcome is to improve whatever that might be, or increase the number of teachers, however you're going to state that. And I feel like in the output column, it is about perhaps it is saying something to the degree of filled Z number of vacancies in high need school, or addressed, or like five, this is the tricky part, right? I think it's about trying to state the product of the service that is in place that will ultimately be able to achieve that outcome around reducing the gap. So you're not quantifying, and Yvette, I completely agree with you that you're not really quantifying that the gap is closed here, but rather you are quantifying, at least in my opinion, I think you are quantifying the activity you provided within the context of that gap.
Okay, I think I understand. And I you know what, a little light bulb went on for me as far as performance measures, because there are defined performance measures that show that like how many members are serving how many community beneficiaries.
Yep.
And in a sense, it's like implied that this is sufficient, correct, helpful, in service of, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep. I'll go ahead, Yvette. You were
No,
about to say something.
When I said, you know, equity gaps closed, in my mind, this is more of an outcome kind of thing. Okay,
Yeah.
because you're addressing a condition, you know, you're achieving a long-term condition, you're closing that gap. But I think in terms of looking at it as an output, it would be, so, you know, the number of teachers you brought into the classroom, or the number of beneficiaries that you served who are who don't normally who are
in the target population.
In the target population, who don't get the same kind of services as other individuals or something.
Got it.
Of that nature.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for talking that out. I wanted to really fine tune my understanding.
Yeah, no,
it was hard for us to process too, because we figure, how do we quantify, how is that, you know, how do you count that, you know? So it's just about, you know, I think this conversation was so helpful, you know, for everyone. So
yeah,
thanks so
hi
much.
guys, it's
Need.
of course.
Okay, so the one last piece of this outputs piece about equity gaps closed, I think just in summary, again, outputs are sort of the counts of the products that the program is providing, right? And with these equity gaps closed, I think, let's say you're in the sort of community problem section, you're highlighting a historical inequity or current inequity about, let's say, a certain population of students do not have access to, or there's a teacher shortage, particularly for students in a certain population. And that's due to perhaps underfunding of schools or whatever that might be, right? Let's say that's in the problem. Here, what you might want to then have this great opportunity to carry that thread through to your outputs to say, we've now placed X number of teachers in Y schools that have historically been underfunded or have teacher shortages, right? So I think that it's less about attributing something to one or the other, but rather I think it's about how you state what that output is and framing it within the context of that inequity that
like
you know
that.
in the problem.
I like that. That sounds reasonable.
Okay, that's tricky, and that's new for this year, but we like it. It's important.
Yeah, it is new, and it was it got us to think about this whole thing. So very important to mention is that here you will have to include your prioritized outcome. I mean, I'm sorry, output from the performance measured section. So we know this will account for all your activities. In this case, an example of an output would be like what you saw in the logic model that we showed you earlier, where people stated, you know, the number of individuals that were expected to be served in the different type of activities. So that's very important that you include that. So there will be several outputs because you have a program where you'll be accounting for different things, but you always have an output or two that are performance measure related that you need to track, and and you will have the outcome pairing for that, and we'll be talking more about that next. So again, this is just for outputs, the amount of service provided. So we already went through that. Let's go. Okay, outcomes. So here, let's explain before we get into the outcomes section in more detail, that there are short-term, mid-term, and long-term outcomes that you have seen in all logic models. And it's basically telling you what had changed as a result of the program activities that you have implemented. So, and depending on the level of the outcome, it can reflect changes in individuals, organizations, communities, or the environment. And it could be about skills, attitudes, all different types of things. So that you will make sure to define in your logic model. So basically, it's a specified, what this does, having the short-term, mid-term, and long-term outcomes, this should serve to provide a timeline for when you expect things to happen as a result of your programs. Next. For short-term outcomes, are basically those things that happen immediately after you do something. Yeah, you do a program, you do an activity, and you go in and try to measure if people benefited from what they did, what they heard. And so this will be basically knowledge, skills, attitudes, opinions. It might be that I only sat for an hour session on health, and I was of the opinion that I could eat whatever I wanted, but then after the session, I changed my opinion. I said, I better take care of myself, And so those are the things that would be like short-term outcomes, measuring if a person learns something, or change their attitude about something. And that the good thing about the short-term outcome is that it's something that you could measure within your grant year. That's at a minimum, you will have measured short-term outcomes, Example would be for the logic model that you just saw earlier was that, let's say the example was 35 students will have knowledge of healthy eating behavior based on pre and post tests. The program probably lasted 6 weeks or 10 weeks, whatever, but there was a pre and post to measure, the level of increased knowledge about healthy eating behaviors on these students. And in the logic model, it was specified, and you will have to do this too. You have to specify the number of people you think, or you expect at a minimum to increase their knowledge. So let's say you were serving 50 students, and then you say, oh, at least 35, that would be like 70% of the students served will have improved in that area, will have increased their knowledge. And again, there was another example in the logic model. It was that like 500 people will be served with 1 hour educational events. So, and at the outcome level, that was at the output, yeah? But then at the outcome level, at the short-term outcome level, it was specified that 400 individuals will have increased knowledge, So that means 80% of the 500, is the expectation for this particular program. So you can set you can set your numbers, according to what you think you can do, but also, of course, you have to set them quite high because you want to impact as many people as possible, but you also have to be realistic about that. That's something to keep in mind. Okay, so midterm outcomes. Oh, these are the things that you may or may not be able to measure during the grant year, but these are changes in behaviors or actions. And these are things that take longer, it takes longer. Like, for instance, if you want to measure behavior, let's say those kids that say that learned, about, healthy eating behaviors, it might take them a while to really actually start changing their eating habits, yeah? And the behavior around food. So that would be a midterm, a change in behavior and eating behavior would be a midterm outcome. And it might be like, let's say, you decide to go back and take a look at how those kids are doing, that after you program 6 months later, after they have completed the program, you say, oh, I'm going to touch base with the parents of, of those kids or with the kids themselves via survey or interview, a phone interview or something like that to see how they're doing. So you will be able to measure that. Is that what you wish to do, or if you can do it? And again, you will include the target number that will demonstrate change, and you do that across, also for long-term outcome. Again, here for the midterm, if there is any prioritized outcome, performance measured that is applicable, you will include it here. And long-term outcomes, those are, this is change in condition or a status in life. So it might take a little longer to realize. Let's say you are doing a community program with, again, let's use the example of earlier, children, So what would be the long-term outcome for children? It would be like actually, probably decreasing their BMI, yeah, and I think that's the example you use, Erin, in the logic model. So yes, midterm you check, and yes, they're changing their behaviors, they're eating healthier, they're doing more physical activity or whatever. So long term, you will expect them to, for their BMI, if you were to test that, for that to change, yeah. So that's an example of what would be a long term. It might take a long time, it might take longer than 6 years, it might take years sometimes. So, and what is not necessarily, Erin?
Lost my mouse
I
for a
just saw the
second.
headline.
Yep, no, I was referring, Dell had a great question, and I think this is a really good one. And the reason we're spending so much time on the logic model is because this is your program description, right? And so I think Dell had asked, is your understanding correct that even if the midterm and long-term outcomes may not fit within a grant year, right? So you're not going to achieve that long-term outcome within the year, they should fit within the 3-year cycle. And not necessarily. I think it really depends, and Yvette, correct me if I'm wrong, but it really depends on the program that you're doing and the outcomes and sort of the progression of outcomes that you've articulated for your program. And so it might be, let me back up. There's this old model that says short-term outcomes are generally achievable between 1 and 3 years, midterm are 4 to 6 years, long-term are 7 to 10 years. That may or may not apply. I've seen some really excellent logic models, particularly with the AmeriCorps programs, that say short-term outcomes are maybe a few weeks, a midterm outcome is a year, and a long-term outcome is a 3-year. And that has made complete sense. And so for a good example of this might be if someone was logic modeling out a program, a mentoring and tutoring program designed for high school students or middle school students, right? The short-term outcomes were improving their attitudes around school and learning, and improving their academic skills. Their midterm outcomes were academic performance, and then their long-term outcomes were high school graduation, right? And so if they're implementing in a high school program, that might be very doable within the 3-year period of the program. However, for an environmental remediation project or an environmental cleanup project, that might be very different. You might have a short-term outcome of the number of acres of land improved, and then you might say that, or the number of rivers improved or the amount of volume of water that's been cleaned. And then it might say the river has improved flow. I'm making this up as I go, by the way. And right, the river has improved. But if your long-term outcome is that you want to ultimately improve the quality and the cleanliness of the northern New Jersey waterways, that's probably going to take more than 3 years. And that would be outside the scope. So I know this is not the answer you want, right? It would be much easier if I could say it has to fit within this time period. But unfortunately, that's not the case because each program is different. My recommendation, though, is when you think about your programs outside of the grant year in particular, or the 3-year process of this grant, think about what makes the most sense for what you're trying to do. If you are doing a nutrition education program, and you know that BMI change or reductions in health status of cholesterol or blood pressure, that might take more than 3 years. That's okay. Map out what you truly believe is the progression of outcomes. And if you change someone's knowledge, then it'll change their action. And if you change their action, then it'll change their condition. Really think about what that is for your program. Then think about what is the realistic time frame for those changes to occur. If you don't know it, do some research, check it out. Look at what other programs that might look or feel somewhat similar to yours, or look at other programs that have had similar outcomes and look to see how long it took people to achieve those outcomes. Then use that timeline as the underlying foundation for your logic model. Yvette, how does that sort of resonate?
I totally, those were very good examples, first of all. Second of all, establishing your numbers, and I know you're going to go over this, establishing your numbers, your targets, and all of that should, to a certain extent, to a big extent actually, be evidence-informed or evidence-based. And so you're not going to be pulling these numbers off the top of your head kind of thing. I mean, you may have some idea based on the programs you've done before, AmeriCorps or whatever, but it should be somewhat documented in, evidence. So, and I know they're going to go over that, so I'm not going to belabor that, but I did want to say that, the example of, changing a condition, they expect you to write in your performance measures and logic model, short-term, midterm, and end term, but they don't always expect you to achieve the end, the end term, because they understand that, just like Erin stated, that some of these things are achievable within the 3-year cycle, but some may not. I think the important thing is to describe, to say that, to state, this is where we're headed. But I think that, within this 3-year, this is what we can actually affect in terms of change, whether that's, short-term, midterm, or whatever. So I don't know if that answers your question, Erin, but that's pretty much my assessment of it. Okay.
Thanks, Yvette.
Right.
Del, I'm glad that was
a
helpful.
clarifying question too about outcomes. So with our teachers in classrooms intervention designed to improve students' academic outcomes, and then mid and longer term, ultimately kind of solidify a path for them future in education and or career, the next steps. Like historically, I would have thought to myself, well, I should say, like, it's going to increase persistence for kids in school. It's going to increase high school graduation rates. But then I stopped myself and I said, wait, if I say it's going to increase graduation rates, is somebody going to read this and say, well, yeah, why didn't you attach outcome ED blah, blah, blah. I don't know the number, but ED 22A for graduation rate. The thing is, we're not doing an intervention that's fully focusing on that metric, because that's around, right? Like that would need like a lot more stuff involved. So I'm even hesitant. Do I talk about something that I see as a midterm outcome? If I'm going to open up a can of worms of why didn't you quantify it, we have something in our performance measure list that matches.
Yeah, I guess at this point, you are right. You're not expected to write performance measures for every single thing that your program does. So
Okay.
when you do your performance measures, you're supposed to kind of like focus in on what is the primary outcomes that I really think that I can achieve. You certainly could state things like, we anticipate this may happen or will happen, and along this journey or whatever this path, and we're setting them on that path. But at this time, this is what we're actually measuring in terms of, up to the midterm or something of that nature. Because you
Okay.
can't do it all. You can't do it all. I mean, it's just performance measures are a snapshot in time, basically.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, that's helpful.
yeah.
Then I won't wake up in the middle of the night about that one. Thank you.
But a good question.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't mean to intervene here, but go ahead, guys.
Yeah. No, this is good. This is what we need.
Thank you. And going back to outcomes, now that question brought something to mind, and is that, remember, you will have, as I said earlier, you will have several outputs, you will have several outcomes, you will have a primary set of output and outcome. That would be basically your AC, performance measured pairing, and you just have to make sure that when you line up your logic model, everything makes sense. You have to line it up in a way that, for instance, this output, then there would be the outcome that relates to that output would be in the same line, the same with the midterm and long-term outcome. That's something to keep in mind when you start building your logic model. I forgot to mention that earlier. But I bring you back to the logic model that I originally showed you, and then you probably see it again later. Because again, now probably all the stuff that we were talking about what to include, what not to include, it is here, So we were talking about the outputs, including your performance measure output here, and the outcome, the number of people that you intend to serve, the number of people for which the outcomes are expected. All of this is laid out here very clearly. So yeah, that's the logic model. So we have a bunch of best practices to share with you. I'm going to bypass this because for the sake of time, Erin, they're going to have this in the slide deck. Just make sure that you correctly categorize your outputs and outcomes. That's very important, okay? So, and remember that you have 8 pages to do this, It doesn't mean you probably don't, if you don't need the 8 pages, you won't use them. Just don't use the pages just to fill the space. You have to be very concrete, very specific, and make sure that you use the space, to your advantage. Okay, thank you. And now,
And if you're like me, I need summaries as we go. Key pieces so far. Community section, you're talking about severity, pervasiveness of the problem, who, what, where, when, and why. You're talking about historical inequities. You're narrating that in your narrative. You're summarizing in your logic model. You're summarizing in your performance measure module. Your logic model, this is the meat and potatoes of what you're doing for your AmeriCorps program. This is really your opportunity to describe, this is what the AmeriCorps members are doing. These are the interventions and activities. And you're going to rely either on these slides plus the NOFO to really make sure you hit all of those specific bullet points that AmeriCorps wants. You all probably have seen or done logic models in the past. You will need that expertise and know that AmeriCorps has specific requirements for that logic model that may be above and beyond what you're used to seeing for logic models. Okay. Performance measures. How do you measure a program? Just to give us a track record of where we are, we just outlined sort of the community and the problem. We talked about the if, meaning if these things happen, then that will occur, right? That's detailed in your logic model and it's nicely aligned and it makes a very pretty picture of probably something that's very complex, right? And so that's the beauty of that logic model, and it takes a lot of forethought and planning. So the trick now is, how do we know the if and the then occur, right? This is where we get into performance measures. Key things about performance measures, I'm sure a lot of you know this, but this is ongoing monitoring and reporting of program accomplishments. This gets to telling us about progress towards those goals and towards those targets, right? AmeriCorps requires that you have performance measures for your outputs and your outcomes. The thing is, if you are trying to design your performance measures, there's a process that we recommend. Sometimes people will say, I'm just going to pick whatever you tell me and build the program around that. I would not recommend that. What I would advise, and I know Millie would very much agree, is that think through your program first. What are you doing? What's going to happen because of your program? Once you have that, articulate out what those outcomes are, articulate out what you think the outputs are. Once you have that, then go into the performance measure guide that AmeriCorps provides and look to see what focus area you're in, look to see what kind of interventions you're doing, and then start to look at the performance measures that they provide. This might be a little bit iterative in that you're going to lay out what you think to be true are your outputs and outcomes, but then you might judge the language a bit to more closely align with the measures. The measures are the things that measure the progress on your output or outcome. Okay. The rules. The AmeriCorps really encourages applicants to pull from their already existing performance measure guide. It's linked here. I'm going to show you an excerpt before. The link is also in the actual NOFO. These are performance measures that you can select from. Again, there's that iteration piece I just mentioned. And they also tell you if you don't like any of those or if those measures don't fit, here's how you write an applicant determined measure. Talk a little bit about that. When you're picking your measure, and as Yvette mentioned before, and Ricky, thank you for your question, your performance measures are not going to measure everything your program does. Say it one more time. Your performance measures are not measuring everything your program does. Your performance measures are tracking the key prioritized output and outcome at a minimum of your program. If you are in an elevator with the director of AmeriCorps, some of you have heard me say this, you are in an elevator with the director of AmeriCorps, what is the key outcome you would want to share with that director? That's a way to sort of help you prioritize what that key outcome is. Okay, so AmeriCorps wants you to put at least one pair, and they have some rules about what outputs and outcomes should go together. We're going to walk through that in a second. So at a minimum, you need one output measure and one outcome measure. I've seen applications where people have 12 measures total. I don't recommend that if you can help it. Quality over quantity here. Okay, these are going to be aligned with your logic model. What does that mean? If you are going to increase someone's knowledge about how to prepare healthy foods, you want to make sure that you pick the performance measure that says the number of people who demonstrate increases in health knowledge. But then in your logic model, you want to say increase health knowledge, and then it nicely aligns with H17, which is just a code for what the measure is. Okay. Your outcomes can be measured in a single grant year. Again, those short-term outcomes, we talked about this. The other thing I really want to highlight for you is the performance measures are specific to the outcomes in the beneficiaries that you're serving, right? So the outcomes in your logic model, sometimes people talk about changes that will happen within their members. AmeriCorps really wants to see, well, what about the people that are being served? So if you are serving students, the performance measure outcome is going to be specific to the changes you expect to see in the students, right? Not the AmeriCorps member serving the students, but the students, the beneficiaries. Okay. In that performance measure manual, there's a couple pieces that are helpful for you, or I think they're helpful. My opinion, right? In the beginning of this manual, what they do is they sort of give you an objective, they show you selection rules and interventions. Unpacking this for you, let's say you are working in economic opportunity, right? Let's say you want to provide financial literacy classes or something in that sense. You're going to look in the economic opportunity section of the guide. You're going to look at, well, what about economic opportunity are you trying to do? This is sort of your objective category. You're going to look at it. Oh, I want to provide financial literacy courses. Okay, I go right here. So the outputs and outcomes that are readily available by AmeriCorps are the number of individuals served and the number of individuals with improved financial knowledge. Oh, they're saying that you might want to pick these if you're doing an intervention around financial literacy or providing education. Oh, that aligns well with the idea that I have for my program. Okay, I got to go back to my logic model and make sure I say improved financial knowledge for my short-term outcome. Right now I have improved knowledge about credit scores and paying off long-term debt. Okay, those are kind of the same. I can make that work. Okay. Again, that's that piece that you really want to hone in on. Ricky, go for it.
Find opportunity. So I have something in that row that's similar for performance measures applying to our program at Relay. This NA and piece. So I guess I interpret that to mean that perhaps if I was using that row, find opportunity, I would not need to quantify in this particular, in my logic model.
I think you would still want to try to the best of your ability to quantify in your logic model. I think for the find opportunities section, I've never actually seen someone use that, as a matter of fact. But I think here you want to, in your logic model, if this is really what you want to go for in terms of your performance measures, in your logic model, you do want to have a little bit more specificity for what that really means and what you're thinking the outputs might be. And I think go for it. If you have an output in mind and you have a target of what you're trying to achieve, I would still try and quantify that to the best of your ability. But again, I've never seen anyone use that, so I'm going to defer to Yvette in case she has another thought here.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I also have not seen, I think this is pretty new and I'm not too sure exactly what they mean by this. I hate to say that. And that's not unusual for AmeriCorps to put things in and not explain them in their concepts. I would take a look at the mandatory supplemental guidance to see if they define this. I have not seen it. So I'm not sure exactly how to answer this, quite frankly. Is this something that your program has in its performance measures?
So in education, one of the things listed is teacher core, which I think is actually a vestige of something done long before I was working on AmeriCorps programs at all. So I think teacher core maybe used to have actual measures and stuff, outputs and outcomes. But now it has this NA thing exactly listed the way find opportunity does on the slide on the screen. So I've never thought of putting in teacher core as an other in the objective screen of eGrants. I never thought about doing that. I still think it's all under the specified K-12 teaching, but I'm thinking now, do I need to start really breaking down some targets around the members? In a way, I feel like no, because they're not the beneficiary population. I think of that as the K-12ers, the kids.
Yeah.
So it just seems like maybe beyond like the placement of them, other metrics around identifying metrics, outputs and outcomes around them is maybe not necessary. And that's my interpretation of the stuff in parentheses. Outputs may be reported as performance data elements. It seems like basically that's like narrative that we're putting into our performance reports. It's not really like something I have to quantify here in the logic model.
This is something, I mean, I can elevate this question and ask because I'm not exactly sure. I can't, and I don't want to give you the wrong you know,
Yeah, it's a bit of guesswork on everybody's part, I think.
Yeah,
I get it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I will elevate it and share that with the group.
Okay. So going back to this manual, we like these questions, by the way, so keep them coming. In the manual, the reason I show this to you is sometimes I do this and then we look at applications and someone sort of writes a different performance measure or doesn't quite hit all of the pieces. So definitely take a look at this. And once you sort of pick out what performance measures you're prioritizing. Again, you might look at all of those listed performance measures and say, yep, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. And oh, that matches, like all of these match my logic model. Awesome. And prioritize a pair, right? You don't have to do all of them. Pick the one that is most core and critical and foundational to your program. So let's say for my financial literacy, I pick these two measures. The first one's an output, the second one is an outcome. That's an appropriate pairing based on the guidance. Okay, so this is what I have to do. Now I know what these key terms are saying. I already know that I have to keep these things in mind, and I have some sense of how they're expecting me to measure it. Okay. Again, performance measures are not a comprehensive measurement strategy of anything and everything in your program. Your program is more than the performance measures. We get it, it's important. We also know that to measure everything, you would need a whole lot more funding and a whole lot more people power than you have. So think about it that way. You're not measuring everything, you're picking a couple things that are most critical. Again, so this was our example logic model. I have a couple outputs listed here. I have a couple outcomes. Again, we sort of abbreviated this to fit. But what I'm saying here is that I'm going to prioritize the students that complete the nutrition education course. I have these other outputs, but to be honest with you, this is the core of what we're doing in this program. It's really about providing nutrition education to students. So that's my prioritized output, and this is my prioritized outcome. It's that they will have increased knowledge of healthy eating. I have other ones here, and those are important, but I'm going to prioritize these. Okay. So one of the things we've learned over the years is that eGrants is not the easiest to enter things into. So let's unpack a little bit of this. So first, when you're going into eGrants, the performance measure module is a separate module that you have to enter information, and you sort of follow the prompts. You're going to enter your focus area, your objective, you're going to enter your intervention, you're going to enter your MSYs. These are things that you can see in the performance measure guide, and you just sort of follow the prompts with what makes the most sense for your particular program. Within each of those objectives, you're going to write a performance measure title so you know what it is. Haha, here it is again. You thought we were done with it. You're going to summarize the community problem. Again, you can probably cut and paste at this point, but you're not going to take everything from your narrative and put it here. You're going to summarize. You're going to take critical information to put here. You're going to select the intervention. And then you're going to select from a drop-down the output and outcome. Now remember, you've already narrowed your focus area and the intervention, so now it knows what outputs and outcomes to give you to select from. Then you're going to enter your MSYs. This is blurry, but here's a screenshot, right? So here it is, you're selecting the intervention, let's say it's education and training. And let's say in my example, I was actually thinking this is more access to care than health knowledge. I'm already going to select from the drop down of what my output is. This is where you select it. Mind you, you've already done this planning before you go into eGrants and enter this. You don't want to be thinking through it and planning as you're entering this. That's not a good idea because things crash and you want backup for this. Then you open up a data collection tab, and this is the meat and potatoes of your performance measure section. And I'm really going to encourage you to use the one spot in here where you can write to write a whole lot. So here you're going to describe your intervention activities. Interestingly, this is the one narrative space in your application to describe your intervention. The only other place you're describing your intervention is in your logic model.
Yeah.
So I would say make sure that this basically are reading off the logic model for this section to make sure they match.
Mm-hmm.
Once you have your measure, you're describing your intervention, you're going to select your data collection method. This might be a tracking form if you're looking at the number of people served. It might be a survey of some sort you're going to select, or you're going to write in your option. You're then going to enter a description of the instrument. We're going to pull this apart in 1 second, and then you're going to enter the measure target. This is the number that you expect to achieve, right? So you saw in the examples, I'm going to reach 500 students, right? I would enter 500 students here because that's the measure that I think I'm going to accomplish in the 1 year of my program. I'm going to talk about this in a second. Now, in that text box, that's the only place you've got to explain yourself about your measure. So use it. And so these are some of the key things I would recommend adding in that box. Define your key terms of the measure. If you've ever heard us chat, we always emphasize this because it really matters and it helps the reviewer understand what specifically you are looking at within your program and if it matches what you're actually doing. So in the example of my nutrition education course, I might be teaching kids about how to identify healthy vegetables versus when they're not prepared in a healthy way, right? That might be the specific of what I'm doing. And so for me, I'm defining health knowledge as knowing what's a healthy way versus a not healthy way of preparing a vegetable. Not the best example in this case, but just to give you some sense, it sort of gets at a deeper level of specificity about what health knowledge is. Another key thing is what is improved? Improved could be anything. Is improved that you scored 1 point higher in an assessment at the post versus the pre? Is improved a statistically significant increase? Maybe, maybe not, right? But tell us what you're thinking here. Explain what the instrument will measure. If you're using a survey, what's that survey of? You tell me health knowledge, but health knowledge, as we just described, could be huge. So tell me more about what that instrument's going to measure. Even if you don't necessarily have the instrument ready to go, this is your opportunity to plan out what needs to be in there and make it really clear to the reviewer that this instrument is actually going to be able to collect the information that you need to inform the measure. You're going to explain how and when it will be administered. A survey will be administered by the members at the beginning of the program, and then it will also be administered at the end of the 6 weeks of the program, or whatever that might be. If you're using an existing tool, which we recommend, but know that that's not always possible, talk about any information you might have about the reliability and validity of the instrument. If you're working with an outcome performance measure, tell us how much change is considered to be an improvement, again. And also for an outcome, how the data will be calculated to determine change over time. Are you calculating difference values? What does that look like? How will you know what that difference is? How are you making that assessment? And then this is where we recommend stating how your target was set. Yvette started to talk about this earlier. So when you set this target for your output and outcome, tell us where that's coming from. How are you calculating that? If you are someone who has had this program in the past, or whether it's an AmeriCorps program or not, tell us about your past performance. If you've done this for years and you know that each year you serve on average 500 students, you're going to say based on past program performance, we've set the target of 500 students. And also based on past program performance and maybe our performance measures, if you've had an AmeriCorps program, we know that we typically see our outcome in 80% of our served students. So therefore our target is 80% of our output. And that's how we got to 400 from 500 served, right? You're also going to be bringing in the evidence to say, other programs that have done this, typically they see 80% of students achieving an outcome and increasing their health knowledge. This is where we recommend writing that. You could write it in the narrative. It has to be somewhere though. So definitely talk about where you got that target. That little text box does a lot. Okay. Best practices, prioritize, prioritize, prioritize. And set your performance measures as your performance measure targets as numbers. These are not percents. You're actually looking at raw numbers. Remember, ultimately, all these numbers get combine to present sort of the national picture. So if you present percents, that can't be done. So you have to give numbers. Talk about why you selected your targets, how you got there. If you don't like the performance measures available to you, you can do an applicant defined one. I'm just going to say, if you go that route, please call us. Let's talk about how you design a really good applicant determined measure. Explain, explain, explain. Give the reviewers a good picture of how you plan to collect information for your performance measures. And definitely check out that performance measure guide. There are checklists and appendices in the back of that guide that are really useful. One is the instructions for how to enter it. The other one is a checklist to look at what are the key components that you want to consider when you're selecting and describing your measures. Okay, now we're going to get to evidence. Everybody's favorite. You got this. That's all I'm going to say. You got this. If you've done this before, you know it. If you haven't done this, you've got this. Okay. So evidence is the justification for why you think the outcomes are going to happen. Evidence is just telling AmeriCorps, I know this is going to work, and you should feel confident in giving us the funds to do this program because there are other studies or research or other things that have been done that have said when you do this, these outcomes happen. It basically is the justification for your logic model of sorts, right? It is the backup. It's the support. Ultimately what it is. Now, AmeriCorps has specific requirements for how they want you to describe this backup. And what they do is they judge it in two ways. One is, what tier are you at? Which basically is an indication of how rigorous, basically, or how conclusive that evidence is, if I could say that. And that's evidence tier. Evidence tier is broken apart. There are 4 potential tiers you can pick from. We're going to go through them. And then there's evidence quality, right? You can have all kinds of studies, but how good are they? How quality are they? How recent are they? So we're going to pull apart each of these. I like this model. Some of you have seen this, but hopefully this will help you. There are 2 pieces of evidence tier. You can have an evidence-informed project, which basically means I'm taking evidence and backup from a couple different programs and a couple different concepts, and I'm packaging it together to tell you why I think my program's going to work, right? It might be I've got 2 different interventions that my members are going to deliver, and so I'm going to tell you what we know to be true about the different components of those. I'm going to pull that from different places. When you're in that kind of scenario, you're looking at one of two levels of evidence, right? Again, this is that evidence tier part 1 of evidence. 1, pre-preliminary. Pre-preliminary is not a bad thing. Pre-preliminary is no one's really done what I've done, and no one's really evaluated it in a research kind of capacity. And so we have pre-preliminary information to tell you that this is going to work. And so again, you don't have an outcome or impact evaluation or research study, and the evidence that you are using to justify your program's outcomes does not come from the specific intervention that you are delivering. We're going to define that in a second. But you might have performance measure data, right? You might have some of those data, and you're going to bring that in to talk about your program or programs like it. Let's say you've done that, but let's say you do have an outcome evaluation of your specific intervention. Let's say you use that new budget section, right, where you get 8 points for talking about data collection in the budget section. Let's say you have an internal evaluator or data analyst who looked at your data and did an internal evaluation and said, here's the results of that evaluation. You might fall into the preliminary category of evidence. The key here is you have an evaluation and it is the exact same intervention, right? The evidence that you have is from the exact same thing that you're proposing to do. And this is, you might not have a super rigorous design, right? Like you may not have a comparison group. This is sort of a non-experimental design. Once we get up to evidence-based, that means you actually have really solid justification. You have a solid research base, a solid evaluation base that says this program works, and it is the exact same program you are implementing. At that level, you pick from 1 or 2. Moderate means you have an outcome evaluation. That evaluation was done by someone outside your entity. You hired some other research and evaluation group to look at this, right? Introduce more of that objective lens. The evidence is from the same intervention, same as preliminary, but then you've got a little bit of a more rigorous design, research design, right? Harkens back to research methods. Think about the fact that basically you are trying to isolate your program more in terms of the research. But this evaluation is only specific to your particular site. You can't spread this far and wide. You can't say that the program in New Jersey is the same as the program in Pennsylvania. It's really just isolated to this one place. To get to strong, you need moderate, but then we sort of up the ante. Strong is super, super strong. So, strong is have an experimental design, someone else evaluated it, it's the same intervention, but this evaluation, I've isolated this particular program, and I can tell you that no matter where you implement this program, the outcomes that we see are attributed to this program. That's really sort of the distinction. Each level sort of ups the ante in terms of the rigor of the research. How fancy, how costly, right? How much each of these research studies is able to isolate that the outcome is attributed to the program. Okay. By and large, we see a lot of programs that come in at pre-preliminary. If you are at the pre-preliminary stage, based on that sort of outline, here's what you need for your application. You need to actually state that you have pre-preliminary evidence. State that pre-preliminary. And then you're going to actually describe the evidence, the rationale, the justification that you have that the outcomes you expect are based on something, right? So you're going to describe how your design is informed by evidence from a previous project. This isn't necessarily theory. This isn't necessarily a model. What you're talking about here is other research studies or other projects that have been done, that have been explored, studied, researched. You're going to talk about what outcomes were achieved, and how those outcomes and activities are relevant to you. Make that a really clear distinction. If you've got performance measure data, use them. Here's a perfect opportunity.
Excuse me, Erin, before we move along, Dawn posed a question and probably can answer it quickly. If you get someone to measure, analyze the data, is that an allowable cost, or should it be the duty of the person who oversees the members? So I think under the new conditions of the grant, there would be an allowable,
okay, good. Yvette's nodding.
So, yes. So I just wanted to make sure we address it because we mentioned it earlier. So the question comes handy, now. So yes, you should. I mean, moving forward now, when you write your application, you can write up any related expense to that effect.
Yeah, those are allowable
Anything that has to do with data collection and analysis.
Yeah, anything that has to do with evaluation, performance measures, all of that, those are allowable costs. They're directly related to the program.
Okay, thank you. And I think that Vicky had a question. She raised her hand earlier.
I'm just gonna wait till you guys do the slide. Maybe you'll end up answering my question.
Okay.
Thanks.
Super. Okay, so let's say you have preliminary, moderate, or strong evidence. Again, you're going to state which one of these you have in your narrative. You're actually going to type it out. And then you're going to describe the evidence from the study that you are using to justify that your intervention will achieve the outcomes you propose. This study has to be of a program that is exactly the same as the one you are proposing. Okay, if you are making one modification in terms of you're serving a different population, you're serving a different type of site, you're measuring something different, they're no longer the same, you're at pre-preliminary. But let's say you've been doing this program for a long time, you're just sort of replicating it, right? You may have preliminary, moderate, or strong evidence. And here you're going to explain the intervention being assessed. What are those core components? Help the reviewer see that it is exactly the same intervention, right? Hit those points. You're going to explain the study design and how the data were collected. Help them see where this information came from so that they can make an assessment of, is this the right information that we're looking at? And then report the outcomes. These should be the same outcomes, or at least there should be some similarity in the outcomes between what you said are going to be achieved in your logic model and the outcomes that these evidence studies are reporting. And then you got to give them the reports. You're going to upload those reports. This is the description that you put in the narrative. Word of caution. I said it before, I'll keep saying it. It has to be the same exact intervention. One little bobble or weave shift in the program designer model, it's no longer the same intervention. You're at pre-preliminary, which is okay. Hit it right. That's the primary piece here. And then describe it well. These are the 5 key bits of information for which AmeriCorps judges whether or not it's the same intervention. So the point of me listing them here is if you're coming in at preliminary, moderate, or strong, make sure that your description of the evidence, when you talk about the core components of the project that was in the study, make sure you hit each of these 5 points and show that it is exactly the same as what you've proposed in your logic model. There's that alignment piece again. Okay, we're only going to do a couple of these, but I'll share these with you later. I'm going to give you a description, and I want you just to sort of take a stab at what level of evidence you think this is. Maybe we'll just do one of them. Let's do this one. Okay, applicant's Healthy Core program delivers a nutrition ed curriculum to 5th grade students for 1 hour a day, once a week. The program is adapted from some fancy pants program. Their successful approach, which used the same curriculum to provide nutrition educations for 1 hour a day, twice per week. A randomized controlled trial conducted last year found that students in the famous nutrition program increased their knowledge about how to prepare fruit and vegetables in healthy ways by 40% more than the control group. And this person didn't submit any additional documentation. What level of the 4 tiers, pre-preliminary, preliminary, moderate, strong, at what level do we think this evidence is? You can write it in the chat. You can come off mute.
My guess is pre-preliminary.
Tell us why. And I gave away the right answer before I could ask you to tell us more, but you're right. Tell us why.
So my why was because it's
I remember what you said earlier, Erin, too. And
Go ahead, Del.
they didn't provide any information.
Wait, let Del say it.
So my main reasons was the change in the duration of the program between the applicant program and the famous program, it being once a week to twice a week, and the fact that they didn't really articulate how the population centers were the same between the national program was another thing that like pushed it back for me.
Ding, ding, ding. Check mark. Good job, Del. Good job, Millie, but you knew the answer too. All right, so when you get these slides, you'll see there are 3 more examples. Take a look at them to sort of gauge how you might describe. We're running out of time, so I want to highlight, we have a chart in here, sort of if you're looking at some evidence and you're trying to decide at what level, or sort of when we talk about the rigorousness of research, we know that this might be another language for some folks. We get it. This tries to unpack some of that to look for some keywords in those descriptions of methods, and we're always here to help if you need some help figuring this out. The last little piece I want to highlight quickly is evidence tier is one part of it. You also are going to be judged on the quality of the evidence that you provide. So in your description, the questions that we have posited here are things you certainly want to make sure you address in the narrative description of your evidence. You want to make sure that it's relevant evidence and including your past performance measure data or cited research studies. We've seen some evidence provided that's not really relevant, right? Like I'm talking about financial literacy and about, improving people's knowledge of financial literacy or financial concepts, but perhaps the relevant evidence is a one-on-one session where somebody worked with a client to try and eradicate some incorrect things on a credit report. They're within the same realm, but those are really two different program concepts, so they're not necessarily relevant. You want these studies to be recent, within 6 years. That can be tricky. If you've been doing this a while, check on the evidence that you have, make sure that it's within the last 6 years. And do your studies demonstrate a meaningful positive impact? We've seen some research come in where they didn't actually have any impact, right? The outcome didn't really happen. They measured it and they have data for it, but it didn't show an increase or it didn't show an improvement. It kind of then takes away from the justification that your program model will work. So make sure you pick evidence that actually says this outcome is going to happen. Make sure you talk about who conducted the study. For those 3 additional layers where you're measuring the same intervention, you want all of those pre-preliminary factors plus make sure you document that they are the same intervention in your description. Demonstrate what that looks like. Talk about how the studies were designed. This might not feel good to you, or you might be like, I don't even know what these words mean. Call us. We're here to help you sort of help translate what that means. And how were the data collected? Basically give that description. Best practices, aka our recommendations for you for evidence. Summarize your evidence. Make sure that the evidence aligns with your program that you're proposing on some specific areas. Make sure that if you're picking preliminary, moderate, or strong, it's the same intervention. Use recent data and use that past performance measure data to your advantage here. You've done a lot of work to capture it, and it might not just be from AmeriCorps. You might have other data to support this. Okay, we are 2 minutes over, so I apologize for going over. But the last few things to share with you is that we have some links to resources in this slide deck that you'll be receiving. These are all in the NOFO, but we've linked them here for you. Again, really encourage you to check out the performance measure guide. It's really helpful. And all of the specific requirements that we outlined today are listed in the full NOFO description. We've just sort of extracted them and tried to translate them for you to the best of our ability. Oop, I went the wrong way. Also in the slide deck, we've given you a checklist of some things that we recommend taking a look at as you prepare your application. So maybe consider looking at these to make sure that you hit all of the key points. We have it for logic models, performance measure, evidence, and data collection, right? So all of those are in here. And so those are just tools for you to use if that's helpful. And then last but not least, we are your other tool and resource that's available to you. So as you're preparing your application and you're trying to apply some of these concepts, interpret them and make them work for your application, we are a resource to you. Email us. We're happy to jump on a call. We're happy to look at a draft of what you're working on. Or if you just need some validation, sometimes that happens to like, am I doing this right? Probably yes. You're more than welcome to reach out to us. We're happy to help. We don't have any skin in this game. Our skin in this game is so that you feel prepared to present the best representation of your program and that you submit a competitive application. That's our goal. We don't review applications. That's outside of us. We're just here as a resource to help you feel good about the application that you're submitting. So ran through that. Again, all of this will be available. And Yvette, Millie, Lori, Lisa, Carissa, what else?
I think you pretty much covered it all. Erin and Millie, you guys were fantastic. Thank you so much. Is there anyone else that has any questions on any of this at this time, or any questions for me at this point? Okay.
I'm also happy to stick around because I know we're over, but if people need to leave and others have some questions, I'm happy to stick around for a little bit longer.
Regishwar, you have.
Yeah, thank you. Probably everybody knew I was going to raise my question, but this has been really good, really helpful, just given me lots of food for thought. So I'm reflecting on a lot of it. And I was at the other webinar a couple of weeks ago that was the overview and asked a question about the AmeriCorps evidence exchange, our study there, which is considered strong evidence on the evidence exchange. It's 10 years old, but also we've been doing internal impact evaluations, not external, but internal. So my feeling is to cite like a moderate evidence tier, assuming, of course, like I'm got the same dosage, duration, characteristics, etc. All of that being consistent, but not putting it in the strong tier because I'm combining it with our own impact evaluations, which don't have, like, they're not external, and they're like, they are at a lower tier, but they are certainly something that we're basing our work on, is the track record we're developing to date with our members. Does that make sense to sort of like, can I downgrade my evidence, if you will, from the evidence exchange because I'm combining it with other pieces?
I think it's okay as long as you explain why. If you're basing it on a 10-year-old study
Yeah.
that is already out there, they may not even be aware of it because they obviously have it as part of their evidence exchange. But you may want to just explain, you're not going to get points taken off because you applied for moderate rather than strong. All right.
Okay.
But so if you can justify, you're submitting this particular application as moderate only because, what you have on the evidence exchange, even though your study is there, it is 10 years old, and you don't want it to be, you want to be kind of in line with what their definitions of moderate and strong are.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably what I would do. I'd probably just, or, there is, you could ask, what you should submit, but you're doing internal input evaluation. If you're going to be using that data, I would definitely go for moderate. That's my own take. Erin, you may disagree. I don't know. You may disagree.
No, what's tricky is that it feels like it should be moderate, but when you look at how they define preliminary, the distinction between the preliminary and moderate is the use of an internal versus an external evaluator. It's tricky, but I'm with you, Yvette, of like, explain the heck out of that.
It's sort of like taking the average. Do you know what I mean? It's like we've got a strong one on this side, but it's 10 years old, but it is also recognized by the AmeriCorps program on their evidence exchange. And hopefully they know what the heck I'm talking about and they've seen that. And then on the other side, I've got the preliminary side because it's an internal impact evaluation. So it's like I'm averaging them to moderate.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Again, if you want to put that in writing, I will elevate it to AmeriCorps, as one of the questions for the competition.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it weren't for that 6-year mark, you'd be like, okay, we got this,
Exactly. Yeah. It's crazy.
Tricky. Other questions? Dawn had asked in the chat about the due date, so he put the link of the NOFO and then sort of extracted quickly, so it might be wrong, but double check it. I guess November 8th. Yep. So the 27th is intent to apply. November 8th is the due date for the application.
Correct.
I also put Millie's email in my email, and that's the best way to reach us. I don't know. I have a problem not being on email, so I'm usually going to see it. Might take me a hot second to reply. Millie can usually reply faster. But if you want to chat with us more about any of these questions or tricky ones come up and you want to thought partner on it, we're here. And again, usually if there's a question that we don't know the answer to, we knock on Yvette, Lori, and Lisa and Carissa's door and say, help. We know the bounds of what we know and we don't know.
You know your stuff. You've been doing it for many, many years. So we were very confident in that. But as always, let me just say that please use their services, because I can tell you that they actually do the review for our readers. And so in terms of, their feedback, they just provide, they don't score, but they do provide some feedback. And generally most of the program applications, they don't cover everything, like they don't, a lot of the criteria is missed, a lot of the questions are not answered. So use them as a sounding board, run it against them and just see what they think. Yeah, so you can ask for feedback. I don't know how soon, that's a question from Dawn, is how soon can we ask for feedback? I mean, that's
Email me
today. So, yeah, I'd just reach out to them and, say, this is my thoughts on this. Is this fit this criteria or not? That kind of thing, whatever. All right.
We've also had programs reach out to us to say, I don't know what I don't know yet, but here's what I'm thinking, and then stop there. And we can sort of carry that on too. The one caveat I'll give is that sometimes we've heard from people, well, I just want sort of a template of what I need. And can you just give me, an XYZ survey, or can you give me XYZ, just, this is the way it is.
Yeah.
And I will tell you now, that's generally not our approach, because it all is so contextual. It all matters about your program, and what's right for one program is not right for another program.
Right.
So one of the things we will do is ask you a whole lot of questions about what you want to do, who you're working with, how you envision this. We're going to ask some questions just to better understand the context that you're working in.
Yeah. And please use that checklist they provided. That is an excellent resource, because sometimes you don't realize you may have missed something. So, use that checklist. And if you don't understand the question on the checklist, definitely ask. I would review this whole PowerPoint, this whole presentation again as I'm writing. I just can continue to review it so that, I have a clear understanding of where I'm headed.
And we've had a couple questions, Yvette, and Lisa, I guess, and Lori, about where this will be posted. Now, I know we typically send you the slide deck, and the recording gets posted. It gets posted on on New Jersey AmeriCorps' website, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that should be on the flyer. The NOFO was originally announced. And Lisa, can you post it also in this?
Post what?
Our website, our AmeriCorps website.
Sure.
Yeah.
I've got it up already, if that's helpful, Lisa.
Okay.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
Thanks.
So that's where you found the NOFO, and I think this is usually where it's under the recordings.
Yeah, it should be posted by early next week. We had technical difficulties with last week's recording, and it's been submitted and should be posted end of day tomorrow for last week's Yvette's review of the general overview of the NOFO, with Lori's review of AmeriCorps 101. Really informative, good background. Please look for it. The presentation and the slide should be there again later today, tomorrow, and then this one we'll post.
Probably available next week. Yeah.
Next week, early next week.
Yeah.
Should be up.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you all so much for your good questions. That makes this fun for us, and we apologize for going over a little bit, but we appreciate that you sort of stuck it out, and that's usually because people have questions, and that makes it fun for us. And again, it all is context dependent, so we appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all, and good